So we're now going to start looking at these invisible zips, or they're also called concealed zips. So it depends on which part of the world you're in. And actually, you will notice if I hold this up that I have capped this off with a little bit of a stitch here. And if you are feeling brave, you can do that with your machine, or you can just hand whip stitch it, because you'll notice that the zip is significantly longer than my fabric. So what I'm going to do is, with a pair of just standard scissors, so they're not special in any way, they're not my snippers and they're certainly not my fabric scissors, I'm just going to cut the coil off, and we are going to work with this zip here. So we're going to look at this one using a sort of a standard method. So what I want to do is I want to mark out the seam allowances, and then I'm going to stitch this part with a normal stitch length, and then I'm going to teach you how to insert this invisible zip. Okay, so I've sewn this bit up here, and I have got my zip ready. So when you're doing an invisible zip, the best thing to do is to make sure that your zip is open, because we're going to look at getting this pinned into position. So you may be able to see that I have marked where the 1.5 centimetre or 5/8 seam allowance finishes comparative to the stopper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this marker to place on the raw edge of the top of the seam allowance. Okay, and that's going to be my placement pin for the zip. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to pin this into position, and again I'm going to lift this seam allowance up by 90 degrees, and I'm going to pin just to the seam allowance, so the tape is getting secured in and the coils are sitting pretty much flush to the surface. In this case it's the ironing board. Okay, I'm going to do that on the other side, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to then stitch this in, but we're going to start by doing some basting stitches first. I'll get this pinned and we'll go and do that. Okay, so this has all been pinned and is ready to be basted. So I've unfolded the seam allowance and I've got the zip pinned in. Now when you sew an invisible zip, the objective is to actually sew underneath these coils, and these coils, if you place your thumb or your finger over it, you'll see that they open up, and that line there is where the coils meet the tape, and the closer you can sew to that line, the tighter and more invisible your zip will be. So pinning it is fine, but what you tend to find with just pins in the equation is when you start putting pressure on the coils to open them, you'll notice that the zip starts moving inwards. So where the pin is in position, it's fine, but where there isn't a pin, the whole thing starts to slip. So this is why basting it in before we do any sort of permanent stitching is an absolute game changer when it comes to invisible zips, and something I would recommend over and over again. So I'm gonna get this basted, and then I will start prepping for the next set of stitches. Right, so this has been basted, which is fine. And the other good thing about basting is what you can do is turn it over, zip it up, and just make sure that everything is sitting lovely and straight and there's no puckers, and there isn't, so that's good. So I'm going to unzip, and I'm going to unfold the seam allowance, and I'm gonna get prepared for stitching. So what I'm going to do first and foremost, I'm going to start by uncurling the coil, and I'm going to place that uncurled. So this requires a little bit of finger manipulation. I'm going to place that uncurled coil under the channel of the zip foot. Okay, so I'm going to teach you how to do this using a standard zip foot, because I think you can get a nice visual of it, and then I'm going to teach you how to do it using a concealed zip foot or an invisible zip foot. So I'm just going to walk that through initially, and I'm trying to get the needle super close to that coil line. So I'm going to just reverse it, and I'm going to stitch it quite slowly. So I'm just going to replace that there. So what we want to do is keep your finger on the coil, keep them open, and allow for the needle. So I'm just going to get rid of that tail thread. And the edge of your foot to walk through and walk it down the zip. Okay, and I'm going to stop about here, and the reason why is because I'm not going to be able to get beyond that, because the coils go through the tab and I want to sew underneath the coils, so I'm going to have to finish this last little bit off with a bit of hand stitching. So I'll just release that, and hopefully you'll be able to not see my stitching, which is actually the intention. So when we come to zip it up, you should see that that is sitting very close or on the edge of the coil. Right, so whilst actually I was quite happy with that stitching, the beauty of invisible zips is that you're never going to see this stitching line. Well, hopefully you shouldn't be able to see the stitching line. And so you can go in as many times as you like to get really tight up against that folded edge. So what I might do is actually just adjust my needle a little bit. So I am able to change my stitch width. So I'm just going to bring that across a couple of positions. We're looking at a couple of points of a mil here. Very, very small movements. And I'm just going to stitch that again to see if I can get any closer. Right, so you might be able to see that I've got ever so slightly closer with that second row of stitching. But as I said, it has had no impact because no one can see this, and that is sitting beautifully, so I'm very happy with that. So I'm going to come in and do the other side, but I'm going to do it using an invisible zip foot. Okay, so this is an invisible zip foot. Okay, it looks very much like a piping foot, but these little ridges on the bottom are a lot smaller. Okay, so like with your zip foot, you've got a left side and a right side. So if you're working on the right hand side of your tape, your zip tape, you'll be using the left hand gully here. What you've got is this bar in the middle, this little ridge that pushes the coils open as you sew. So this will basically protect the coil, and that will push it open, leaving space for it to be stitched with the needle. So that's a metal one. You can also get plastic ones, which I have to say I find to be more superior, simply because this ridge is deeper, and you just get a much more accurate finish. So I'm going to show you how to stitch with that. So I've got the plastic foot on now, and I have positioned my needle in the centre, because this ridge in the middle is obviously smack bang in the middle, and you want your needle to be positioned adjacent to it. So so that's in place. The hole is quite small and there's no open gaps for you to place your tail thread through. So you can just leave it hanging, but the other thing you can do is to run your needle into the machine and to grab a pin or a pair of scissors and just hook it from underneath to put it through the machine. You have to have a whole bobbin loop there to assist you, but that then means that you've got both your tail threads through your feet. So I'm now going to work with the other side of the zip, and as this has got a left and a right hand side, I'm able to use either side to open up these coils. So like I did before, I'm rolling the coils open with my presser foot, and I'm placing the coil in between that center ridge and the edge of the foot. Okay, so I'm going to now start stitching and do a couple of reverse stitches, and I'm going to assist it with my finger a little bit. But what should happen in theory is that this should just open everything up and give you a lovely stitching line really close to that coil fold. And again, I'm going to stop about a centimetre from the zip tab. Okay, so there we go. Can you see how tight that is against that coil? So if I now close this up, you should have, I'll just get that there, a completely invisible zip. So there we go, that's sitting beautifully. Very happy with that. So we can now take the basting stitches out, and I'm just going to show you how you would go about finishing off the stitching by hand. So I'm now going to finish off this little bit of zip with a hand stitch, because you probably won't be able to see this, but we had to stop our stitching with the zip foot about there, because this tab was sitting there. So we really want to be joining up where the stitching line for the seam allowance of the garment meets the edge of the zip stitching line. So I'm going to come in from the underside where the zip is, and I'm going to take my thread and I'm going to assess where there is no stitching. So I'm just going to mark that so I don't miss anything. So, and obviously it comes down to about there. Okay, so this, I've got this hand stitch between here and here. So what we want to do is, again, we're focusing on just the seam allowance and the zip tape itself. I'm going to come in with my needle as close as I possibly can underneath the coil, and I'm just going to start this off by leaving a little tail and running a loop several times to do a knotting stitch. Okay, and then I'm going to very carefully hand stitch this into position. And by doing this, you are closing off any hole whilst keeping control of the fabric and the zip, and creating a very lovely professional feel. Now, if you did want to hand stitch your invisible zips in, this is how you would do it. And if you're working with silk or very, very fine fabric, you may find it easier to work by hand than using your sewing machine. But there are some things that require a little bit of hand finishing, and in this instance this is one of them. So if I just do that side, again I'll lock it off with a couple of stitches. What you should be able to see is that that has now been finished, and I've only got this side left to do.